Hello Internet, this week's episode is going to focus on jiggle physics, yes. I'm going to go over one of the methods that I use to give your characters a little bit more realism. In Unreal, I'll be using a CC3 character, but the principles should work for any others, provided they have the right skeleton structure, and I'll go over that a bit later. So to start, I'm just getting a few animations that I can use to demonstrate the effectiveness of the jiggle colliders that I will be implementing later. iClone itself has spring settings which allow you to get some sort of physics going on your characters, but only the breasts, not the bum. And I will put a link below which will cover the various settings, the bounciness, the mass, etc., and the strength. These spring settings seem to only really work in iClone, where they work well, but getting them into Unreal is a bit difficult. You can do it with LiveLink, but I find that there are difficulties getting it to record in sequencer, so that's why I use another method, which is the main topic of this video. Now, I mentioned earlier that this technique requires that you have the right skeleton structure, so you need to have the right breastbones upon which you can connect colliders, physics colliders in Unreal. Some people actually add additional bones for the buttocks, but I won't be doing that in this tutorial. Anyway, once the character is done and you've got your animation, you can export it to Unreal. I've got a tutorial, I'll link on the top right, that describes that process. As I mentioned, I won't be using LiveLink, but I will be exporting an FBX. I think I'm copying over an earlier import because my Unreal crashed, so the materials didn't import in, now they will. I've also not yet imported animations. You can tell because they are not in the content folder there. So I'm just now tidying up the character and doing a few fixes to some of the shader materials, and I've got a tutorial for that which I will also link up in the top right. I'm now importing just animations. This way is a lot quicker than importing a mesh, the same mesh each time. You can see the differences in the settings. I only really change one thing for the import animation settings, and that was to disable import the mesh. And the first time you do it, when you import the mesh, it will, if you set everything up properly, you will automatically import a physics asset and a skeleton that you can use for future imports. So when you use this method, apparently it's important you turn on simulation mode. You can do that by pressing Alt S, and you can toggle it off by pressing Escape. This ensures that physics simulations will happen in the viewport, I think. To be honest, I'm not really sure. I just switch it on. But later on, you're supposed to switch it off when you use the sequencer. Anyway, I'm adding an animation to that asset. But there's no physics at the moment. And also there's some other girl standing there doing nothing, which we'll fix later. I'm just basically just checking the animations, and they all seem to look fine. When testing this, I tend to have a gap between the animations, or a static section, which you'll see why later. So now for the physics bit. These capsules and spheres are colliders, and the first thing we need to do is disable them. And you can do that by flagging them as kinematic. So now we have to select those breastbones and add a sphere collider to each. So in the skeleton tree on the left, you can look for the specific bones, CC base L rib twist and CC base R rib twist. Now selecting each one, you've got to add a sphere. So I've selected one there, and selecting a second one. So you add a shape and select sphere. I select both and resize to fit the character as closely as possible. These objects will dictate a sort of area of influence for the underlying mesh and how they can move around, basically. And in the next steps we will sort out how that happens. These are the settings that I followed from the Renderosity article that I found on this, which covered most of it. So I'll leave a link at the bottom there so you can follow them as well. Yeah, you're gonna want to disable gravity, although that seems a bit counterintuitive. This is the part, adding constraints, that I always seem to trip over. You're supposed to select the spine to bone according to the article, but I selected the collider by mistake. You create new constraints with those rib twist colliders we made earlier. And if you look on the left, it's there's a graph interface which will let you know whether you're doing things in the correct way. I also noticed that the Spine 02 collider was set as simulated. I thought I made them all kinematic, but it could have been something that I messed up earlier. But I just changed that back to kinematic and things seem to work okay. Now this shows you whether you're doing things right or wrong. The rib twist constraint bone or collider should be in constraint bone 1 and the spine 02 in the bottom, the second constraint bone 2 slot. I find that once you get one of these working properly, you can refer back to it, which is what I did quite a lot, and also double check the graphs on different characters, and fortunately that seemed to work. Okay, now we have to configure the angular and linear limits. Again, I just followed the article. It's not the easiest of processes, but it seems to get the job done. There are other methods involving anim dynamics and Unreal's spring system, but I haven't really researched them. And this one, you can use the same method for the butt, so that is a major selling point to me. And as I say, once you get one done, you can save it and refer back to it just to double check that everything is configured correctly, and it's easy enough to do when you've got the graph to refer to. Then there's more configuration, this time the linear and angular motors. Basically, you're configuring how things move within those sphere colliders. So keep an eye on the girl on the right. She has physics colliders on, or simulated. I'm not sure if they will only work in the editor with simulation enabled, but it's good practice. So you basically do the same for the bum. You select CC base pelvis bone and add a shape capsule. And fit it to your character. Adjust the physics to the collider you just added. Gravity off. And then you add the constraints. You've got to select CC base pelvis. I did the collider again this time instead of the bone, and selected the pelvis. You can see the chain there in the graph. Now you notice in this case the constraint bone is in the wrong order, so I had to figure out how that was. I did a lot of going backwards and forwards, referring to another character that I'd done which worked fine. In the end I gave up it and I just copied it and pasted it, which I'm pretty sure I didn't do the first time around, and kind of crossed my fingers. So this is the other character, which I'm using to reference. And I just went ahead and configured all the limits and the angles and the motors and all this stuff that, to be honest, I really don't quite understand completely, but monkey see, monkey do, and the result seems to work in the end. I'm also just using the same settings for the breast, so you might want to tweak that. Yeah, don't forget to save, very important. Although I did have the autosave go, I suddenly got this mess, and I'm just wondering whether the autosave doesn't save everything. Because again, I couldn't really find the reason when I backtrack, except usually I save manually. And I ended up redoing it. And oddly enough, I did notice there was an extra bone in the new version I was doing, and I have no idea how it got there, but it didn't seem to affect the end outcome. It's possible that I added an extra one by mistake and hadn't deleted it, but fortunately everything worked out in the end anyway, in spite of this issue. So yeah, without the reference character, I think I would have gone mad. So make sure you save. This time I saved it twice for good measure and didn't do anything different, and it works fine, so go figure. I'm using Unreal 4.27, just for your information. Now I'm just doing a quick demo on how to set up your tape recorder. Essentially, you have to add the elements that you want to record or to have move around or interact in your scene. So in this case, I've added the character mesh, Phyllis, and the camera, which I wanted to move around a bit when I eventually started recording. You have to go to the character and double click on that bit and add the animation in. I think the old method, the sequencer, was a bit more easy, but getting used to this one. Yeah, don't forget to set everything to 60 frames per second because that's what iClone outputs at. Now this is something I did earlier, so the physics hasn't been added yet. So this is what happens when you don't add a blueprint. When you record, you get this wonderful result, which is far from optimal. It's just something I wanted to show you, so if that happens, you know, oh my gosh, I've got another thing to do, I forgot. And that is to add a blueprint. Last thing, hopefully. Actually, might not even be the last thing. So this is fairly simple procedure. So you've got to add a capsule collision component and your mesh as well, and your mesh has got to be inside that capsule for that weirdness not to happen. Static mesh, skeletal mesh, and it's in there, but you've got to add your mesh in the details panel on the right there. So there's Phyllis, and we need to increase the size of the capsule. I've taken the character out of the hierarchy so I could scale her properly, or scale the capsule properly, and then put it back in the hierarchy there so that it's a parent-child relationship with the capsule. You set the collision preset to custom, and we have a bunch of other settings to tweak which are also in the Renderosity article. I actually set the object type to pawn, although it says overlap in the article, which I actually couldn't really find that. Pawn seems to work. And simulate physics. You can also then set the collision presets to Ragdoll. If you'd like to check out other methods to achieve this physics on your characters, then please check out Reallusion's Unreal Tips and Tricks forum. They're very helpful. I'll leave a link below. On the left is non-blueprint, and on the right we have the blueprint. And as before, we have to add the blueprint to the sequencer. Yeah, you won't be able to access this details panel when the simulation function is running, so you can just switch it off at the top. So I'm just adding the animation asset to the blueprint. Before it was just static. Now the animation is included with the mesh. Now, apparently you are supposed to disable simulation mode, or make sure it's not on while you're running sequencer. So I think I've got my camera moves included in there. and I usually test things in the legacy renderer, the old renderer, which is a bit simpler, just to make sure that everything's working, and then go to the movie render queue to finalize things. So we have physics being recorded, played through the sequencer. I actually researched this a few months back, so I'm not sure if there are better methods, newer, easier methods. If you do know one, please do let me know in the comments below. So I'm just taking the final render into the movie render queue. That's got a lot more options and stuff to output your footage, but I'm just using the base because obviously I'm not going to be using this in any videos. It's just as a demo. And this is the final render. Not particularly high resolution or anything. So you do that sequence and you can get your physics enabled characters in your Unreal movies. Okay guys, that's all for this week. As always, I hope you found this useful, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. This is Mr. H signing off.